Hey everyone, as you are well aware, I enjoy debunking pseudoscience and charlatans of all varieties, and one area I have yet to tackle is pseudoarcheology. What is that, you ask, and who's peddling it? Well, a number of people lately, so let's dig into it. Most people know what archaeology is. It's the study of human history through its material remains. We dig up ancient cities and learn about our past through the structures and artifacts we find. This is science, and archaeologists are scientists who follow a rigid empirical methodology, as is explained in great detail over in my archaeology series, which is part of a larger series on anthropology. But just as with every other area of science, there are those who bastardize this field to gain notoriety and make a buck. Physics has its electric universe cranks who make pseudo-documentaries for Gaia. Nutrition has its healers and supplement peddlers who direct their gullible targets towards their endless array of useless or even harmful products. Archaeology is no different. Charlatans in this realm peddle fabricated tales and pure whimsy as a challenge to real science, and it is a narrative that has grown increasingly popular over the past few decades. There was a time when pseudoarchaeology was limited to ancient aliens on the History Channel. That's right, the guy with the crazy hair we all laughed at. His name is Georgios Sokolos. He was silly, and the show was silly. Atlantis, aliens built the pyramids, all of the classic nonsense, some of which we talked about when debunking Billy Carson. Most of us simply marveled at how the History Channel had sacrificed its integrity to promote sensationalist filth, and went on our merry way. But sadly, this type of content has slowly gained enough popularity to weasel its way out of the fringe and into the mainstream, primarily thanks to, who the hell else, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan regularly platforms charlatans of all varieties, and one of his favorites is a guy named Graham Hancock. Hancock appeared in episodes of Ancient Aliens, but he broke into the cultural consciousness in a more significant way through his Rogan appearances, and he is now more or less the face of pseudoarchaeology. To be clear, Graham is not an archaeologist. He has a bachelor's degree in sociology, which does not even remotely qualify him to challenge well-established archaeological knowledge. He's never been on a dig, he's never uncovered any artifacts, and he can't read ancient languages. He is not part of the scientific community. As far as real archaeology goes, he's irrelevant. Knowing this full well, he claims to be a journalist, but he hasn't done any journalism in a very long time, and his current output does not qualify as such. He's just some guy who sells bullshit for cash. Something which is very well demonstrated by his 2019 book, America Before. This is 600 pages of baseless outlandish tales regarding lost civilizations having psychic powers, while claiming the ivory tower academics reject his bold new ideas because they're entrenched in dogma and thus resistant to new paradigms. Why would we listen to archaeologists about archaeology instead of some clueless jerk? The nerve of some people. But with these baseless anti-establishment narratives becoming increasingly popular amongst the public, and so very few experts in the field making even casual attempts to expose his fraudulence, we've arrived at the point where this nonsense needs to be aggressively addressed. Before getting into the nitty-gritty, let's introduce our cast of characters for this video. We've already covered Graham Hancock. The scholar that will be representing the legitimate archaeology community is Flint Dibble. He is an archaeological scientist and ancient historian who specializes in environmental archaeology from the Stone Age to the medieval period across the Mediterranean, with a focus on the ancient Greek world. Flint is one of the very few scientists who has pushed back against this movement, primarily in the form of a debate with Graham Hancock on Joe Rogan's show. Given that Graham's Atlantis bullshit is derived directly from fictional Greek narrative, Flint is quite capable of dissecting Graham's fraudulence. We will also be hearing from Flint in person later in the video. Then we get to the lesser characters, serving somewhat as the comic relief. Dan Richards is a clown who has been cashing in on the pseudoarchaeology grift as of late, starting purely as a Hancock fanboy, but now making some noise of his own thanks to several appearances on Joe Rogan. Dan has precisely zero experience with archaeology. He is a former electrician without documentation who falsely claimed to be a member of his respective trade organization and was called out for it. He doesn't know the first thing about archaeology and is essentially just echoing the talking points of Hancock and other grifters to try and make a buck. Where Hancock's grift is polished and well executed, Dan's is sophomoric and laughable. Even worse than Dan is another grifter named Jimmy Corsetti. He is essentially a professional internet troll. Here is a quick montage of some of his behavior on Twitter. He makes overtly sexist comments, blatantly racist comments, and is generally a complete douchebag. Apart from all that, he has repeatedly encouraged his followers to email Flint's workplace for the purpose of harassing him, all because he dared to push back on the godfather of their grift. He and Dan appeared on Rogan together not long ago, and we will be covering both of these episodes in this video. Assholes like Jimmy make Graham seem professional in comparison, but don't let your judgment waver. All three of these guys are frauds to the core. Now let's dive into the timeline of the video. The centerpiece of all this will be the debate that Graham and Flint had on Joe's show, but there is a lot of lead up to cover, as well as a lot of aftermath, so let's hit all of this chronologically. First, we have to discuss the history of Graham on Joe Rogan. These two go way back. His first appearance was on episode 142, all the way back in September of 2011, and he has been on the show a total of 12 times, sometimes alone and sometimes alongside another guest. With the popularity he amassed from these appearances alone, he was able to wrangle a deal with Netflix for his very own show called Ancient Apocalypse, released in 2022. Internet buzz aside, how the hell did this clown get a Netflix show, you ask? Well, his son, Sean, is a senior manager at Netflix, responsible for unscripted originals, so that explains it. Is there a word for reverse nepotism? Upon its release, Flint himself described the show as a declaration of war on archaeologists. Without going into tremendous detail, it's a pseudoscientific rampage in which he proposes that a highly technologically advanced global Ice Age civilization was destroyed in a cataclysmic flood and is thus easily connected to the myth of Atlantis. This would be baseless enough, but of course he also proposes that this civilization introduced essentially everything to our clueless hunter-gatherer ancestors, from astronomy and math to agriculture and architecture, thus aligning with all of the wisdom from above ancient aliens bullshit he was previously a part of, even if he doesn't make that the focal point of the show. Naturally, anybody educated in this field who pushes back on unqualified jerks like Graham presenting pure fantasy as science only does so because they are arrogant defenders of mainstream academia, and not because he's pulling everything out of his ass like Terrence Howard saying 1 × 1 = 2. Graham visits well-established archaeological sites that are known conclusively to date to thousands of years after the Ice Age, spews some tripe he recycled from previously discredited charlatans like Ignatius Donnelly, who published a similar book in 1882, and tells the viewer to trust him, not actual experts, because he says so. Who needs evidence, right? In response to this travesty of a series, the Society for American Archaeology wrote an open letter to Netflix, basically saying, "Hey Netflix, what the fuck are you doing? This show is sensationalist garbage full of lies that does nothing but disparage and insult the legitimate archaeological community. 1. Graham shits on archaeology every chance he gets, the topic he is pretending to investigate, without a shred of concern for how archaeologists are affected. 2. Stop calling it a docuseries. It's a pile of horse manure. And 3, it's racist as shit to pretend that indigenous people were idiots who can't possibly have developed the things they definitely did develop, so they must have had them given to them by white people or aliens. You make racist people even more racist. And by the way, all the garbage he spews is plagiarized from other people who have been conclusively debunked for 140 years. White supremacy sucks, you suck, please stop." Graham didn't like that one bit, so he decided to issue an infantile response. What false claims? What disinformation? Well, Graham, literally all of it, which has been exposed as false in breathtaking detail countless times, no matter how much you play dumb about it. And we will go over much of that detail in this video. We don't have to highlight all of the whining and pearl-clutching in this letter, as it's truly revolting and reminiscent of the worst apologist preachers, but a few tidbits are too hilarious to ignore. Here he complains about the implication that his show shouldn't have been made, because what about the tens of millions of viewers? Can't they make up their own minds? No, dumbass, they can't. They know even less about archaeology than you do. When you tell them stories they want to hear, they believe you, because that's how people are. It's not controlling the narrative to push back on fraudulent claims, because science is not a narrative, it's an empirical process. The lies you push are the narrative, and you are specifically poisoning the ability of people to make informed choices by lying to them. And in the very next bit, he perfects the art of projection, whining about how archaeologists use rhetoric to defame him, when that is what he specifically does to archaeologists in every episode of his dumb show. Anyway, the rest of this is better addressed as a response to his podcast appearances, so let's move forward. Graham undoubtedly predicted the backlash to his show from educated, knowledgeable people, so he was immediately poised for some grandstanding, repeatedly claiming that no archaeologist would dare debate him, because they're all scared. You know, like how astronomers are too scared to debate flat earthers. Here he is on his website challenging all the ivory tower elites to put their money where their mouth is. Quit it with all the ad hominems, you guys. Debate me, bro. Look at this one guy. He's too scared. Flint decided it was up to him to shut this jerk up, so he publicly announced his intention to debate Graham. Graham was quick to publicize the intended debate, which of course was to take place on Joe's show, because where the hell else? However, in a terrible twist of fate, the day after this announcement, Flint received biopsy results reporting that previously diagnosed and treated cancer had returned and was spreading, so he needed to focus on his health for some duration of time, which ended up requiring over a year. During this time, Flint was harassed to a revolting degree, much of it prompted from Jimmy Corsetti, who publicly and repeatedly claimed that Flint was faking the cancer diagnosis in order to dodge the debate. Graham himself was more cordial about it, agreeing to the delay and wishing Flint well by tweet, and also with Joe in his subsequent podcast appearance. Of course, this is because he was never genuinely interested in debate and knew that he didn't have a leg to stand on, so this development was a relief to him. But recovery for Flint eventually came, and it was time for the debate. The debate is 4.5 hours long, so we're not going to go through every last moment, but given that this is the centerpiece of this fiasco, we do need to spend a good amount of time here, so let's dive into it.
I'm here to try to discuss with Graham and to test his lost civilization hypothesis. He has this, he's written about it, many books, and he's given many talks here and on Netflix, and he's talked about this idea of a lost advanced civilization from the Ice Age, an advanced civilization that's around the globe, right? And in particular, he thinks there was a global cataclysm at that time, and the survivors introduced agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and arts to hunter-gatherers. And so I'm trying to tackle this with an open mind, and I want to tackle this with the perspective of my own experience and my own expertise. And so in that sense, if you think about what Carl Sagan says, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Graham is in many ways the first person to admit that the evidence he has is fingerprints. It's kind of what he thinks is this technological transmission to hunter-gatherers, but he does not have any direct dated evidence of this civilization.
This introduction to the exchange will also serve as its summary. Graham pretends there was some ultra-advanced Ice Age civilization. He has no evidence for it. At all. After these next 4 hours, that will still be the case.
And so I'm here doing a lot of research. I'm here to present what I see are two clear disproofs of a lost advanced Ice Age civilization. And I mean, archaeologists were fairly sure this does not exist. We've been looking for this kind of civilization for several hundred years. This idea of a pre-flood civilization has been around for several hundred years.
Your claim was that Graham ignores this?
My claim is that he ignores most of the evidence for hunter-gatherers in the Ice Age, which is...
that he ignores it, or that he doesn't focus on it as much as he's focused on this ancient advanced civilization?
I mean, I think that's one and the same. I think if you're going to look at the Ice Age, we need to look at the totality of evidence to understand what's there.
Joe doesn't like what he's hearing about his boy here. Flint says Graham ignores archaeological data. There were hunter-gatherers in the Ice Age. Archaeologists study them and know a lot about them. Graham doesn't give a shit about science, so he doesn't talk about what we know. Joe's not getting it. Is Graham just not focusing on this because he's focused on the crap he makes up? Flint tells Joe that's the same thing. Fabricating claims about the Ice Age involves ignoring everything we know about the Ice Age that proves him wrong.
And so, for example, he proposes the reason why the Ice Age civilization isn't there is because it's underwater. It's been, we've had 200 feet of sea level rise since the Younger Dryas, and therefore it's not accessible. And so I really want to focus on Ice Age coastlines, evidence from Ice Age coastlines and excavations, underwater evidence from the Ice Age, things like that, these areas where he says that archaeologists don't look, but we are looking, and what we find is the ephemeral traces of hunter-gatherers, rather than some sort of advanced civilization.
We've looked, Graham. That shit ain't there. You have absolutely zero empirical evidence for your stories. He even admits this point blank a bit later. Let's continue.
So when you're finding remnants of ancient hunter-gatherers, how much of the ground do you think you've studied?
we've definitely not studied most of the ground.
Right.
But as I'll show, we've studied a lot, and we actually put together predictive models on how to find this stuff. And so because it's really expensive to go diving, right?
And so how many dives do you think have been done? Like how many times?
Thousands.
Thousands?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And lots of different sites have been found from all over the world.
And specifically, it was done to try to locate these...
To try to locate Stone Age,
civilizations.
Ice Age stuff, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe is already fishing here. How many of these dives have been completed, Flint? Like 1 or 2, right? Like you've barely scratched the surface and just totally missed the super awesome Atlantis site, right? Oh, thousands, you say? And you use predictive models to figure out where to dig so you're not just stabbing randomly in the dark? Well, shit.
And then my second thing I'd like to focus on is food. I am an archaeologist who studies ancient food. I'm an environmental archaeologist. I've studied millions of animal bones from the past. I've helped collect thousands and thousands of seeds like these, and it's something that people don't realize we can get. We've developed sampling methods, and we now at this point have millions of archaeobotanical remains, so seeds from ancient civilizations and ancient societies all over the world. And I want to sort of show you how we understand domestication as a process, and we can see where it happened in real time, in real space, the sort of evolution from a wild plant to a domestic plant, because that counters Graham's idea that the civilization introduced agriculture. It was not an introduction. It's something that happened in a real space. And we'll track how we can see humans taking control of the reproductive life cycle of these plants.
There you go. 2 very firm lines of actual scientific evidence against Graham's imaginary civilization, which once again has precisely 0 evidence for its existence. I wonder if Graham will engage with this evidence like an adult. Anyone want to take some bets? In the meantime, Joe at least seems like he's getting something out of this.
So we can date that transition from domestic to, or
and
from
what
wild
are the
to
oldest
domestic.
seeds that you found?
Oh, the oldest seeds we have go back tens of thousands of years. The oldest domesticated crops we have go back about 11,000 years.
And where are those from?
From Syria, Turkey, the Fertile Crescent area, yeah.
Is it possible that there was domestication before that in other parts of the world?
I'm going to show you why that's not possible.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's kind of my goal there.
Okay.
Yeah, because and it's not even a disproof of an advanced civilization. It's a disproof of agriculture. Period in the Ice Age. There's a lot of reasons why there was no agriculture, and so I want to get into the depths, the weeds on that. Let's say. Yeah.
Okay.
So to summarize, there are no material remains anywhere in the world that support Graham's made-up civilization. There is also no evidence of any agriculture from that time period, even though this is the alleged main output of this made-up civilization. Anything else?
We have radiocarbon dates directly dated from 13,000 sites in Europe and Siberia. We have quite a bit of evidence of this ephemeral evidence for hunter-gatherers, if you see what I mean. And so the evidence is just enormous, this database for hunter-gatherers. And so I think it's important that we deal with the existing evidence and see where it leads us.
Following evidence? Thinking like a scientist? That's boring, Flint. You'll never get a Netflix show with that attitude.
Essentially, you're saying there's a clear chain between what we know of in terms of like hunter-gatherers and then more modern civilizations. It's a pretty linear line.
No, I don't see it as a linear line.
Not linear, that's a bad, but that you know at what point in time it started, I should say.
I think what we can say is we can start pinpointing the starts of domestication and things like that. But I think that what this big data set that we now have shows is there is no linear trajectory to human culture. It's actually very heterogeneous what happens. It's different in different areas of the world, and therefore we need to understand the local context to understand them.
Gee, that sounds pretty incompatible with the idea of a super awesome Atlantis civilization that might even be aliens, which taught all the dumb people all the cool stuff all at the exact same time. Oh well.
At different times, he's described that the civilization that he's looking for from 12,000 years ago, it was advanced as, say, our own civilization in the late 18th or early 19th century. And so, as an archaeologist, we study technology, we study the material remains of the past. And so I wonder what we're trying to look for, right?
Essentially, what the hell are you implying with this 19th century claim, and why haven't we found anything even remotely like that? In the 19th century, we invented the steam engine, railroads, the telegraph, the telephone, cars, light bulbs, photography, the cotton gin, and steel. That's some good shit. Is that what you're talking about, Graham? You think some civilization from 12,000 years ago had stuff like that? Then why can't you pull a 14,000-year-old steel beam out of the ground, Chief?
Graham has acknowledged that there's a good chance there's no metallurgy, for example, with this civilization. He said maybe a decision was made not to use metals. And I'd say we could definitively prove there was no large-scale metallurgy in the Ice Age. If you look at ice cores in the Arctic, right? We can track metallurgy of the Roman period, of medieval periods, based on lead emissions that end up in these ice cores. And there are no emissions from metallurgy in the Ice Age. So we can be sure that there's no global metallurgical civilization that's doing a lot of mining and smelting. Certainly they're not burning fossil fuels like they might be in the 18th or 19th century. So we know that could not have been around that early because it would show up in the atmosphere.
Oh, don't even bother. Apart from you not being able to point to a single thing that supports this claim, we can also just show that it's impossible anyway. There was no metallurgy happening at that time. God, I love science.
Graham has mentioned that the bulk of marine archaeology has focused on shipwrecks and not the continental shelves. And so the thing is, at this point, we have something like 3 million shipwrecks from around the world. And so one of my questions for Graham is, if this is a global civilization with ships, why is it that we don't have shipwrecks from this global civilization? I see this as a big, big problem. If we're looking for a civilization that's traversing the oceans, we should find these shipwrecks. And similarly, these shipwrecks are located near the coast. They're located on the submerged continental shelves. We are actually exploring these submerged continental shelves in detail. We're able to find scattered ephemeral shipwrecks, but not monuments of some sort of civilization.
Well, Flint, obviously it's because the Atlanteans were so super awesome that they never ever crashed or lost a single ship. Did you ever think of that, Mr. Smarty Pants? Thanks for giving me an idea for my next episode of Bullshit from My Aging Rectum, a Netflix original series.
I just wanted to end by saying, look, archaeologists, what we find is what we publish, right? We are not trying to keep stuff hidden. If I found Atlantis, I would publish Atlantis. Klaus Schmidt found Göbekli Tepe. He published Göbekli Tepe. And so I think that that's really important. We want to change and rewrite history. That's how we make a name for ourselves. Every article I have published and most of my colleagues have published is something that is adding and changing our picture of the past. We're not locked in on a specific narrative. What we're trying to do is update the picture of the past for each other, for our colleagues, and for people all around the world.
This is probably the most important point that needs to be made, which is depressing, because it's so mind-numbingly obvious that it really shouldn't have to be made at all. The idea that the archaeological community would be suppressing the discovery of a lost civilization is the most idiotic notion imaginable. Why? Why would any archaeologist do this? Why would any institution do this? What is the motive? What purpose would it serve? With most other areas of pseudoscience, we can at least identify some half-assed narrative that could trick a few people. Big Pharma is hiding cures so they can make money. Big Oil is hiding the engine that runs on water so they can make money. What the fuck is the explanation here? There are ruins and archaeologists don't want them found. Why? I genuinely can't come up with a single thing. It's so dumb. Archaeologists want to find things. Museums want to display things. It advances the field. It's lucrative. Anyone who falls for this dogmatic establishment bullshit from Graham really needs to take a long look in the mirror, because it's a total farce. But that wraps up Flint's intro, so let's see how Graham takes it.
I think we're looking at a civilization, like all civilizations, that emerged out of shamanism. I believe that they did have rather advanced astronomy and a knowledge of the world. But I don't compare, when I speak of a 19th century level of technology, I'm talking specifically about knowledge of longitude. The longitude problem was not solved by our civilization until the middle of the 18th century. And I'm talking about knowledge of very hard to observe astronomical phenomena such as the precession of the equinoxes. That knowledge is normally attributed to the ancient Greeks.
And the winner of the backpedaling contest goes to Graham Hancock. By technology, you meant knowledge, Graham, so not technology at all. Knowledge of the equinoxes is definitely not what he means when preaching to his gullible audience, and it makes no sense regardless. Do you have some kind of artifact to support this idea, Graham? A tablet of some kind? Oh, you're just pulling things out of your ass, which is the only thing you ever do? Please continue.
Despite the fact that you're telling us that Clovis first has been debunked since the 1990s, really, and you were taught that it was debunked in the 2000s, we can find New Scientist publishing on this in 2013, questioning the Clovis first model. And those who did question the Clovis first model, I do love your picture of this free and open and generous archaeology, but actually archaeologists can be very, very mean to other archaeologists who disagree with them. And the example of this is Jacques Cinq-Mars, who investigated Bluefish Caves in the Yukon and found evidence of human beings there more than 20,000 years ago. Now, if that evidence were correct, it would blow the Clovis first model out of the water. People are suddenly in America more than 7,000 years before Clovis. The reaction to that was not welcoming. The reaction to that was fury at Jacques Cinq-Mars.
So instead of starting off by responding to Flint's lines of evidence against his made-up civilization, or providing any evidence for his civilization whatsoever, Graham goes on a rant about how mean archaeologists are. That's fitting. By Clovis first, he's talking about the idea that the so-called Clovis culture were the first people to inhabit the Americas, something which was gradually challenged and more or less overturned by new information several decades ago, which Flint acknowledged just before this clip. Graham is whining about how one archaeologist did some stuff and other archaeologists were mean to him. This is the angle Graham chose to start with. Pretty telling, no?
The fact is that Jacques Cinq-Mars was ruined by the archaeological reaction to his discovery. His career was wrecked. His research funding was withdrawn. He was ignored by colleagues in the halls of academia. He was insulted and humiliated. It destroyed his life. But he was right.
First of all, he's just flat out lying about Jacques' career, as anyone can see by reading his obituary. After this particular drama subsided, he continued excavating and working in archaeology for several decades until retiring. But that wouldn't be convenient for his narrative, now would it? Speaking of narratives, it's painfully obvious what Graham is trying to imply here. This one guy discovered something and people didn't believe him at first, but he was right. Therefore, all the fabricated bullshit I spew must also be right. It's so depressing that some people can't see right through this ridiculous act. Hey Graham, Jacques had evidence. Do you have some actual evidence you want to show us? Like anything whatsoever? No? Then it's not the same thing. Get a new script. Or better yet, go on an actual fucking dig and see what you come up with. No? You're just gonna harp on this exact point for a super long time to try and poison the well and portray all archaeologists as close-minded jerkfaces? Then let's skip ahead.
The Society for American Archaeology, of which Flint is a member, wrote an open letter to Netflix shortly after the release of my show, Ancient Apocalypse, really asking Netflix to cancel the show. Not to cancel it, this is quite cleverly put. They said, they said reclassify it as science fiction. Now, to my mind, what is the result of 30-plus years of work on my part being reclassified as science fiction is as good as canceling it.
As you can see, strategy number 2 is just whining like a toddler some more about how mean scientists are. And also, cancel culture, please love me, Rogan Bros. Yes, your show is a joke. Cry about it.
It's kind of interesting, though, from that statement, just the last thing. Contrary to Hancock's claims, archaeology does not willfully ignore credible evidence, nor does it seek to suppress it in a conspiratorial fashion.
You know,
but we just showed that.
Yeah, we just showed in the case of Tom Dillehay that his evidence was suppressed, that in the case of Jacques Cinq-Mars, his evidence was suppressed.
Oh well, there it goes. Joe seemed open to learning something, but then Graham gave him a conspiracy to sink his teeth into, the dopamine rush took over, and you can guess how the rest of this will go. Two guys had their work met with unreasonable skepticism, therefore my super awesome truth that is backed by literally zero evidence is being suppressed by the cabal of big archaeology because reasons.
I don't think there's an archaeological conspiracy against me. I'm not so conceited. I don't imagine there's a conspiracy. I don't think archaeologists archaeologists are sitting together in a cabal, conspiring against me. I think that archaeology is locked into a mindset about the past where my ideas simply seem preposterous.
That's funny because that's exactly what you just implied 5 seconds ago, and it's definitely what gullible viewers absorbed. Then you backpedal to seem reasonable and charitable. What a great guy, Graham. Well, you have your opportunity to present your evidence to a real archaeologist right now. Want to get started on that?
There's the Sahara Desert. A fair bit of archaeology has been done in the Sahara Desert, but we're looking at 9.2 million square kilometers of the Sahara Desert. Tell me how much of the Sahara you think has actually been excavated, Flint, by archaeologists.
I'd say a bunch of it has been surveyed, including by my dad.
No. How much has actually been excavated? What sort of percent do you have?
Well, a lot of sort of desert archaeology does not have excavation. It's eroded away due to the wind.
Oh, so what's your answer to my question? How much does archaeology really know about the past of the Sahara?
Well, we understand about the domestication of pearl millet in the Sahara, from when the Sahara was much of it was actually more habitable because it was not desert. So we can see the domestication of pearl millet and sorghum.
No.
We can see
My
ice
question
age
is
sites
my
across
question
it.
is related specifically to my subject. Has enough of the Sahara been excavated for archaeology to exclude any possibility that they've missed anything important in the Sahara?
We have found thousands of sites of ephemeral hunter-gatherer remains in the Sahara.
You're still not answering my question. How much of the Sahara has archaeology actually looked at?
I have no idea, but quite a bit, Graham.
This is just so painfully transparent. The tactic is, Sahara big, you not look everywhere yet. My magic civilization probably where you not look. Flint does a great job of pointing out how this is stupid. We don't have to excavate every square foot of the Sahara. We have surveying techniques that help us decide where to look. There's a lot of wind which erodes the sand, so it's not excavated like sites in a jungle or other types of environments. Graham is totally unwilling to actually discuss how archaeology works because he doesn't know. He wants the answer he wants and nothing else. Flint isn't having it though.
What do you mean by quite a bit?
What I mean is that due to remote sensing, due to surface survey, and due to archaeological excavation, we actually have reasonable coverage across the Sahara. We understand that during green periods in the Neolithic, we can see agricultural villages, and before the Neolithic, we can find ephemeral hunter-gatherer camps where they were napping stones.
But the fact of the matter is, around about 1% of the Sahara has been excavated, and 99% hasn't.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, Flint, you said a bunch of sciencey stuff that's inconvenient to the story I'm pushing, so I'm going to ignore all of it and just say the number I've been itching to say for 2 full minutes now. 1%. That will sound impressive to gullible viewers who also shut their brains off while you were talking.
In that ancient map, I think the Sahara is a fascinating, underserved area by archaeology. And the plain fact of the matter is it's very expensive to work there, it's very difficult to work there, and archaeology has done very little work in the Sahara. Not no work, but very little. Not enough to write off the possibility that evidence might be found in the future. You know, you're basing this on our technology now. Let's look 200 years in the future. Look how much archaeology has progressed in the last 50 years. 200 years in the future, the technologies might be so much more advanced. There's so much stuff that is simply not being looked at. And the Sahara is one of those underserved areas.
Well, Flint just told you that it's actually quite well understood. Your response is, nuh-uh, and but what if more technology later? Still waiting for that evidence, Graham.
And I've recently been with, not all archaeologists are as opposed to my work as you and your colleagues, Flint. But I've been with Marty Parsinen, who's a leading archaeologist studying the Amazon. I've been with Alceu Ranzi, who's a geographer from Brazil, and with Fabio Davais Filho, who's a LiDAR expert. This is very recently, actually. And we did some LiDAR work in that area, and this is the kind of thing that's being found. Huge, enormous earthworks, geoglyphs, which, were we to find them in the West, we would recognize them as almost as henges.
Aw, you did a ride-along. Was it Take Your Children to Work Day? That's cool that you had a little photo op with some real scientists. Did you find any evidence to support your super advanced Atlantis civilization bullshit? No? Just regular archaeology? So this is just a desperate attempt to feign credibility by association that you probably paid for? Cool, bro.
If we were to really investigate the whole of the Amazon from this point of view, we would have to revolutionize our whole view of human history. That archaeology has hardly touched this incredibly important region. And therefore, I do not believe that archaeology can tell us that it can rule out any possibility of a lost civilization, while it has so failed to serve the Amazon and is only now beginning to do so. And those who are doing that work are convinced that there's much, much, much more to be found, thousands more.
Archaeologists do not rule out lost civilizations. They find them all the time. You're pointing at regular archaeological research and pretending it validates the sensationalist science fiction you spew. Finding new sites, a thing that happens every day, does not mean there was a super advanced Atlantean civilization with 19th century technology that taught everybody agriculture. This is pathetic.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if lots of evidence of hunter-gatherers is found in these submerged areas. I would expect that to be the case. But to say that enough work has been done to rule out the possibility of a lost civilization seems to me absurd when we're dealing with 27 million square kilometers.
Nobody is ruling it out, Graham. Nobody is saying it's impossible. You're the one pretending it exists despite having zero evidence for it. That's not how science works. That's why you're a joke to scientists and adored exclusively by gullible people who like your crappy TV show. You have no evidence, and Flint has supplied 2 lines of evidence against you. Funny how you just ignored them both, huh?
I just want to say that I and my wife Santha have done a great deal of diving. We did 7 years of scuba diving all over the world, and what we did was we followed up local accounts of underwater structures. Archaeologists tend to argue this is all completely natural. I have done more than 200 dives at Yonaguni. Santha and I risked our lives. We are not dilettantes. We are in this out of conviction. We're in this out of passion for our subject. We've done more than 200 dives at Yonaguni. I've been hands-on with this structure and all the other structures around it, and I am absolutely confident that we're looking at a rock-hewn structure, a natural rock face that was cut and shaped by human beings.
Wow, you guys are such daredevils risking your lives like that. Seriously, scuba diving just barely below the surface in touristy beach areas is almost as dangerous as ziplining. Be careful, you two. Also, about this structure, experts say it's a natural formation. You say it's man-made. Care to elaborate? No? Just gonna brush right past that without mentioning a single thing that supports your claim or refutes what experts say? Shocking.
There I'm videoing for scale. You can see somebody down that beside that central megalith. Flint, do you think nature made that?
I see no evidence of it being man-made, if that's what you're saying.
You see no evidence of that being man-made. You see a central upright. You see uprights surrounding it. You see the outer curve, the inner curve of the outer megalith matching the outer curve of the central megalith, and to you, that's not even interesting?
I mean, even the photos you were showing at Yonaguni showed a lot of natural fractures along straight lines, and so I think that it's really easy to confuse what can happen naturally and geologically with something that looks kind of anthropogenic, but this does not look man-made to me. It does not look like anything I've ever seen.
Flint reminds Graham that he knows absolutely nothing about geology, and therefore has absolutely no clue what kinds of formations nature is capable of forming, and by what mechanisms. At any rate, rocks definitely do fracture, and when they do, you get 2 pieces that look like they fit together because they used to fit together. I'm pretty sure a small child can wrap their heads around that. Did you find any intricate carvings on those rocks, Graham? Something a little more convincing? No? Just, hey, those rocks look kind of neat to my dumb brain? Got it.
Well, that's interesting because I took a geologist diving there, Wolf Wichman. He's very skeptical. He was skeptical about Yonaguni, but he did confess after we came up from the dive at Kerema that there's no way, in his opinion, that this could have been made by nature.
Oh, but your imaginary friend, the geologist, agrees with you. Well, that changes everything. Did he say why? Did he cite some specific scientific reason that you can repeat for us here? No? Got it.
My wife Santha was born in Malaysia, but she's of Tamil South Indian origin. So we had a great advantage in South India in talking to local fishermen and divers because Santha speaks the Tamil language fluently. And we had asked them, are there any structures underwater off here? And they said, you bet there are. There's a whole city underwater off here. And we've complained to the government about it because we keep catching our nets on it and fishermen have to go down and sometimes they die trying to free the nets. We'd like the whole thing cleared away.
Yeah, that's totally believable. They keep snagging their nets on these super cool ruined cities, like just generally on the whole city, I guess. And when they go and try to untangle their nets from the ruined city, they drown, maybe even from ancient sea monsters. I'm sure that happens on a weekly basis, Graham. Show us some of these awesome ruins, please.
But when we got out there, come on, Flint, tell me these are man-made. Tell me these are natural blocks.
That's a very blurry picture, Graham.
Well, just tell me tell me that they're natural blocks. Tell me.
I cannot tell for sure with these photos.
Okay, there I'm putting my diving knife between two blocks, and there, and then a curved wall. Actually, the team from the National Institute of Oceanography in India, who were with us, were intrigued by this.
Do you have any more photos of that are maybe more convincing?
No, that's what I've got. But I'm trying to keep it short.
Well, that was underwhelming. He has blurry photos of rocks with cracks in them, which he flies through rapid fire so that nobody can even get a good look. And he thinks this is going to be a big win for him. After rushing to the end, he offers an empty anecdote about an imaginary person who was intrigued by his run-of-the-mill rocks. And then Joe asks if there are any more photos, as if to say, "What the fuck, dude? Is that seriously all you've got?" Graham says no, in a somber, defeated tone. "I'm trying to keep it short on a podcast that typically runs around 4 hours, so I don't have time to show a singular photo that would better substantiate my ridiculous claims. That totally makes sense. Maybe hire a professional photographer for your next daredevil expedition, eh, buddy? Use some of that Netflix money."
They are so bizarre that you have enormous straight lines and right angles that look like they were cut, and not just straight on one side, straight on all sides.
Do you mind going? Yeah, so look at this slide. You can see even to the right of those two blocks, what Graham is calling blocks, you can see these sort of straight angles that are made. You can see a vertical one to the left of them as well.
So how do you think they were placed in that manner?
Well, I don't know if they were placed. I think
So you
this
think
is
it's
where
possible
we need...
that they just broke off at some point in history and landed like that?
I think
Again, this is compelling to me, but not as compelling as the other one. Show me the other one with the front curved surface.
Notice that...
This looks crazy.
This is just maddening to watch. Not that Flint is a leading expert in geology, but he clearly knows a thing or two because it's part of his job. And we just watched Joe interrupt him 3 times in 30 seconds as he tried to explain how these definitely can be natural formations. What a farce.
Very bizarre. And how it juts off and it's flat below it in a uniform line. The curved surface of the front of it is very bizarre too. The other image that you had, Graham.
But stone oftentimes fractures in straight ways.
Right.
You know, that's how it fractures naturally.
Yeah, I get it. It's just
Guys, sedimentary rock tends to be super flat and layered because of how sediments slowly deposit and lithify over time. It's called stratification. This is Geology 101 stuff here. And yes, rock can fracture in straight lines. They're called joints. The Dunning-Kruger contest has begun.
It seems to me inconceivable that nature could have made this, that nature could have separated out this central upright and then created the uprights surrounding it in such a perfect way.
Graham, those are some rocks. You're pointing at rocks and saying, how the heck did nature make some rocks? Are you serious with this shit? You're acting like they're fucking Ionian columns or something. They're rocks.
I'm pretty confident we're looking at
What is the most compelling evidence that you've seen in an underwater site of man-made construction or moving of stones?
I repeat, this is Kerema. I'm only showing a fraction of the slides that we have from Yonaguni. Yonaguni isn't simply that terrace. It's a whole series of monuments which continue over a distance of a couple of miles underwater.
Well, you got any that are better than these? Because these are shit. I'm sure you have some super awesome ones tucked away that you're not sharing for some reason.
This is one of the problems I have, is that there is no targeted search for the possibility of a lost civilization, because archaeology is already convinced that no such thing could have existed.
What the hell are you talking about? No targeted search for a lost civilization? That's literally all of modern archaeology. They get satellite data to find potential sites and then go dig there. Archaeologists are trying to find ruins, Graham. It's their job. Get a grip.
Yeah, I mean, so if you want to, Jamie, do you want to look up the site Pavlopetri? Pavlopetri. This is a site in the Aegean, and this is an example of kind of what, I mean, I can boot it up on my computer if you feel. So if you look at this, you have very clear stone courses, for example, underwater. And it's not just sort of stone courses and walls that we find. This is from a few thousand years ago. What we find actually are a ton of artifacts with it, right? They dive, they excavate, they pull up ceramics, they pull up stone tools, and they are able to therefore show that this was an occupied place. This is obviously not due to sea level rise. This is due to tectonic activity, that this is now underwater. Helike off the north coast of Greece also is another one that people have suggested might have inspired Plato's Atlantis, because it happened during Plato's lifetime that city was submerged underwater.
Uh-oh, this sounds like a little bit too much reality for this group to handle. Flint shows what underwater ruins actually look like, and they look a hell of a lot cooler than Graham's shitty rocks. Graham, any thoughts?
You would expect that from the historic period.
Yeah, we would. And so I would expect, though, if you're going to make an argument for something like Yonaguni, that it would look like architecture. Maybe even the type of architecture that you have.
Looks like megalithic architecture to me. Looks like rock-hewn architecture. It looks like the rock-hewn areas at Sacsayhuaman, for example. Jamie actually pulled up some pictures of
we see
those
many
steps.
different blocks at Sacsayhuaman. We see multiple courses of blocks stacked
Do you know
one on top of
Sacsayhuaman?
each
Have you
other.
been there?
No, I've never been there, Graham.
So how can you possibly talk about it?
Because I've seen photos of it.
Well, I've been there dozens of times.
Wait,
In
how
fact,
can you
I was-
actually
I
talk
was-
about
I was
archaeology?
there- I was
Have you
there.
ever
I was there
excavated?
just a few weeks
Wait
ago.
a second.
Okay, but let's look at the images so we can
Let's
discuss
look at
this.
the images, because Sacsayhuaman is a very complicated site. Yes, there are huge blocks in the zigzag walls at Sacsayhuaman, but there are also huge rock-cut areas with steps in them.
I don't understand how being there lets you talk about it better than me. You've been there as a tourist to see how archaeologists have conserved it and preserved it and presented it for people coming by. That is not the same thing as excavating a site. That is not the same thing with understanding archaeological literature.
it's just
to tell me
obvi-
that I've not been there, so I cannot
It's-
talk
it's
about
obvious that
archaeology.
you're ignorant of the site, Flint. You're ignorant of the
Why
site
am I
because you don't
ignorant
know
of
what the
it?
site looks like. You don't know
Well,
the
instead of-
huge areas that are
let's
cut out
not-
of solid rock. You
let's
just
not-
talk about blocks. There's
Let's
much
not
more to
bicker
it-
here,
to it
and
than
let's
that.
look at it and
Yeah,
discuss
let's do
it.
that.
I've been there and looked at it, so I know more than you. This is hysterical. Graham actually thinks he's dunking on Flint by bragging that his Netflix money lets him run around the world to play Indiana Jones pretend times, while Flint is busy at home doing actual archaeology, and Flint scolding him like he's a toddler is very satisfying.
A whole rock-hewn hillside.
Oh, none of that looks like Yonaguni. This looks like actual architecture.
Yeah, it is actually architecture.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But this is not the picture that I would like to see.
Not the picture Graham wanted to see. I think he wanted to see something that looks a lot shittier and more ambiguous, rather than very obvious architecture, so that it wouldn't so clearly contrast with the obviously not architecture from his underwater playtimes.
Sacsayhuaman shows all those other things that are so clearly architecture, so clearly stone blocks fitted and piled onto each other. You don't quite see that level of sophistication at the Yonaguni site, but you do see some stuff that's very bizarre and doesn't look like it's natural.
And I suggest if we were to look further and spend the money and investigate thoroughly, we would find a lot more.
Aw, poor Graham looks so defeated when he hears Papa Joe admit that the underwater rocks don't look as cool as the real archaeological site. We gotta spend more money so we can find it, but those stupid archaeologists are so closed-minded.
Flint, what is your position on that, specifically what he's talking about South America, that South America would be a place where an advanced civilization would thrive because it wouldn't, during the Ice Age time, because it wouldn't be experiencing the brutal cold that Northern Europe had?
No, but I still think we'd want to find some sort of evidence of things like agriculture, right? And so we can look at the development of agriculture in South America and in Mesoamerica. I have slides on that. And we can see that it actually, we can see the transition from wild to domestic in real space and time.
In which areas, though?
So in Mesoamerica, we can see it with teosinte. Further south in the northern part of South America, we can see it with a variety of different crops.
And these are all areas that are outside of the rainforest?
No, some of them are at the edges of the rainforest.
The whole episode should be like this. Joe asks the scientist an actual question, and we get an actual scientific answer, which explains how we've already documented the emergence of agriculture in South America, and it's not in the Ice Age. If you want to challenge this enormous body of knowledge, offer some evidence.
So let's look at some of the Ice Age stuff that we can look exactly where Graham says we're not looking. And I want to show you what we do have.
No, I say you're not looking enough.
Okay, but I want to show you what we find when we do look.
Yes, Graham, we get it. Until the very last stone on Earth is overturned, you'll be clinging to this Atlantis of the Gaps bullshit. But you'll have to shut up for a while, since Flint has a lot of actual science to teach you. Let's get a hefty helping of the science, and then Graham's hot-headed reaction.
So I want to talk about one of his surveys that he actually did in the upper deserts of Egypt, above Abydos. Abydos is famous because that's where the pre-dynastic dynasty came from in Egypt. But up in the upper areas, him with Debolshevsky and Shannon McFerrin, they went and they surveyed 2,100 different places where, based on sort of the geology of the areas, they thought there was a decent chance that people might have been there in the past because of it being not a desert environment, but more of a savanna and more green. And because of erosion, there might be stuff visible. Right? So they targeted these areas and they found, nearly 200 different sites, all dating to the Ice Age, dense scatters, some of them dense, not all of them were dense, like this one on the right, of lithics, of stone tools that showed people working in place, and they mapped them out in the desert. They have 36,000 different artifacts that they found in this survey. This site's underwater. They all date to the end of the Ice Age. And so they're lithic scatters, just like my dad found in the Sahara Desert, of hunter-gatherers underwater sites, though. And so let's see what some of these look like.
Can I ask you something? How do they go about choosing these areas to search?
She's going to explain that.
Okay.
So what she does is she develops predictive models based on the geomorphology. This is her her colleague finding some stone tools.
We don't just do random dives. We go back from the known to the unknown. We look at terrestrial patterns. We look at cultural types. So periods where people were using shellfish as a subsistence base. It's really important to look at those sites on land and say, what are the factors? What environmental patterns or cultural patterns can we tease out of these larger distributions? And then we project it offshore, and if we're fortunate, then after we pull all those threads together, this is what we get.
This material is there to find, even though it's very much ephemeral material from hunter-gatherer camps. And this is oftentimes outcrops of stone for making these kind of stone tools. So that's what they're actually finding, is where they're making it, looking at the geomorphology to find them. It's a painted cave. It's 115 feet underwater off the coast of Marseille, found recently in 1985 by Henri Cosquet, and it's dated to 27,000 and 19,000 years ago and dated by radiocarbon. It's actually the painted cave with the most radiocarbon dates from it. Right? And this is what we have. We have panels of black horses. It's one of the only painted caves with sea creatures. For example, these auks, I think there's some stuff that they describe as jellyfish. There's a black stag. And so we actually are looking underwater and successfully finding this kind of material. But it's not just underwater, because I don't think we need to stop there. If we look at this culture in Europe at the end of the Ice Age, this Magdalenian culture that's associated with most of these painted caves from about 17,000 to 12,000 years ago, the exact period that Graham's civilization should date to. We have radiocarbon dates from a large number of these caves, very clearly locked in time. And what do we see? They're actually, even with sea level rise, they're only a couple miles from the Ice Age coast.
I'm not saying that we're not going to find hunter-gatherer sites. Of course we are. But I'm saying that for archaeology to claim and to quite viciously and unpleasantly attack me for suggesting the possibility that there might be a lost civilization, to make that claim while having failed thus far to investigate thoroughly the vast areas of the submerged continental shelves, the vast areas of the Amazon rainforest, the vast areas of the Sahara Desert that have not been investigated, that claim is premature and that claim is disingenuous.
But we have thousands of sites from these areas.
I don't care how many
Graham,
sites you've got.
give me a second.
There's
We have to talk
3,000
about
underwater sites
Graham,
that have been found.
Graham, working with archaeology is working from the known and what we actually have towards the unknown. And when you say that we're not investigating these areas, I'm showing you that we have. We have evidence from all...
I admit you have.
Okay, so let me explain
Don't
and share with
misrepresent
people.
me.
I'm not misrepresenting you.
Of course you've surveyed some of those areas, yes.
We've surveyed quite a bit of them, and quite a bit of them are on
What do you mean
land.
by quite a bit? How much of the submerged continental shelves
Graham,
have
I'm
actually
going
been
to keep
studied?
showing you areas that we have evidence for. Why do we have so much evidence for ephemeral hunter-gatherers, but not evidence from an advanced civilization that is global?
This should be the end of the podcast right here. Graham does nothing but whine about how not enough archaeology is being done. Flint shows countless examples of all the archaeology being done and explains the logic behind the way it is done. All of the thousands of excavations turn up hunter-gatherer sites. and not a single shred of evidence supporting this incredible global advanced agricultural society. All Graham can do is piss and moan about how it's not enough. Well, it's never going to be enough because he'll go on spewing his bullshit until the end of time, no matter what real scientists do. It's his paycheck. Anyway, there's about another 10 minutes of Flint explaining science while Graham just fumes. That brings us to this bit, which is without a doubt the most important soundbite of the entire exchange.
I'm not surprised that we find hunter-gatherer traces underwater. I'm very glad that we do. I would be very surprised if we didn't. But what I'm saying is that not enough of that 27 million square kilometers has been investigated. Only a tiny fraction has been investigated. And that fraction is not enough to draw the conclusion that we can absolutely say there was no lost civilization. Same goes for the Amazon rainforest. Same goes for the Sahara Desert.
But can we say there's no evidence for an advanced civilization in what they have studied?
In what they have studied, yes, we can say there's no evidence for an advanced civilization. In what they have studied, yes, we can say there's no evidence for an advanced civilization. There's no evidence for an advanced civilization. There's no evidence for an advanced civilization. There's no evidence for an advanced civilization.
There's no evidence for an advanced civilization.
Whoops. This should be the part where Joe says, well then what the fuck are we doing here? It's volumes upon volumes of science from Flint versus but what if my story. It's pathetic, but it gets much worse. Let's get to the accusations.
You have great influence on media and culture. You say that you just have a small YouTube channel, and that's true, Flint. You do have a small outreach on YouTube, but you have a much larger outreach with journalists. Flint and his colleagues have really created a huge fuss in the media about me. I mean, this is just a small example. Satan loves Graham Hancock the most.
But wait a minute.
Not me.
But hold on. They didn't post that, right?
Who?
That
No.
Satan loves Graham Hancock the most?
I'm talking about Flint's influence on media.
Can
and
I
culture.
make a quick comment?
Hold on. But you can't connect Flint to that. Go back to that image again. You can't connect Flint to this.
Well, that was pointless. Someone called me Satan, and it's Flint's fault. To Joe's credit, he isn't buying it.
A lot of my media influence has to do with you announcing this conversation. The media rarely ever got in touch with me about you until you announced this conversation over a year ago. And then since then, I've had plentiful journalists get in touch with me to comment on things related to your show. So you're the one that's actually given me this media platform. I do not go to these journalists at all. They contact me. And
which is great, because that's why you're here. And I'm happy you're here to do this. And I think we could do this amicably. We can discuss these things.
Hilariously, the truth is the precise opposite of what Graham claims. From the public's perspective, Flint was an unknown archaeologist. Graham has an enormous Netflix show. I myself, and almost everybody watching this video right now, also only know Flint because of Graham. So accusing Flint of turning the media against Graham is just a bunch of victim complex bullshit. Graham's not pleased with this swing and subsequent miss, so it's time to accuse Flint of calling Graham racist.
Flint Dibble says Hancock's claims reinforce white supremacist ideas, stripping indigenous people of their rich heritage, and instead giving credit to aliens or white people. Actually, I've never...
Did you really say that?
No, I said that this idea of Atlantis, the way it goes back 200 years, it has been used for those reasons.
So are you saying your quote is incorrect?
I think that it's editing me out of context, Graham. I've never called you a white supremacist or a racist.
No, hang on. That's because you're very, if I may say so, very slippery in the way that you deal with, because you know perfectly well that saying that my work encourages white supremacism and encourages racism is going to end up with me being tarred as a racist. And you know very well that tarring somebody as a racist in this day, look, the results there, down there, make no mistake, Hancock is a white supremacist like Trump. It's racist fiction pretending to be science.
These are not my words. Look,
I'm talking about your influence on media and culture.
You cite 19th century sources, you cite 16th century sources, and I label those as racist. And I see it as a problem to readapt those kind of sources without critiquing them, because this idea of a white Atlantis is what existed in the 19th century.
I have no such idea.
But you might not, but you're citing those sources uncritically. Why
should I not cite them?
And I never make that the foreground of anything that I write. I put that in there as a paragraph, and I say he should not be citing these kind of sources without critiquing them.
Man, none of Graham's tactics are sticking. Archaeologists don't archaeology enough. Here are thousands of sites, no evidence for your dumb stories. Flint's controlling the media. You're the one with the Netflix show. Flint accused me of being a white supremacist. No, you just reference white supremacist sources and also objectively spew rhetoric that fuels racism. The optics have been pretty bad so far, and we're only halfway through. Let's just get through a couple more highlights before moving on.
Do you think there's such a thing as big archaeology?
No.
Oh, how odd. Because here you are, Flint Dibble, January 23rd, this is 2023.
It's scare quotes. It's sarcasm.
The reality is we live in a period where we're seeing an increased distrust of scholars and scientists.
Yes.
As an archaeologist, I think we have to respond by engaging with the public, and we do. In many ways, the reach of big archaeology is way beyond that of Graham Hancock. Think about the millions of school children and parents who visit museums, etc., etc. You've just told me you don't believe in the big archaeology, but right here you've said there is a big archaeology.
That's in quotes for sarcasm.
Oh, sorry, you lost me there.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're stupid, Graham. Jokes go right over your head. Moving on.
There was a civilization. Now, it's you, not me, who say that that civilization was an empire. It's you, not me, who say that that civilization, had temples and was highly advanced in every point. I don't say that. I don't say that.
You don't say the civilization was highly advanced, Graham? You don't say it had the equivalent of 19th century technology thousands of years ago? That's funny, because yes, you fucking do, all the time.
I'm just intrigued by that. I don't know.
That people look different. Yes.
I don't know what it means exactly. But I do find it intriguing.
And I see this as actually an example of the problems here, because you cite Spanish colonial literature about, say, a white Quetzalcoatl coming. You talk about this as different kinds of people. Yes, you do in Fingerprints of the Gods.
We got to get correct on this. We got to get correct on this. Are you saying that the whole story of the bearded, pale-skinned Quetzalcoatl was a Spanish invention?
Yes, I am. I can show you a depiction of Quetzalcoatl from the Spanish period.
I can show you depictions.
Wait,
I can show you depictions too.
No, can I please get the... Here we go. This is Quetzalcoatl on the Borgia Codex. This is from before any Europeans arrived in the New World. Yeah. This is on a hide.
Man, you have to hand it to Flint. He really did his prep on this. And Graham's exasperated sigh upon being proven wrong within seconds of making this claim is music to my ears. He's so desperate to distance himself from the notion of white supremacy, yet he refuses to acknowledge what's known about the sources he references that are associated with white supremacy. It's just embarrassing.
We have a lot of evidence for ancient plants and seeds, right? I'll show you the statistics. We have hundreds of thousands, millions of these just from the time period of thinking about domestication. And we see this shift from shattering to non-shattering in barley, in wheat, in rice, in every single grain species that we have domesticated.
What bearing does that have on
getting
rid of a lost civilization?
I'm going to get there. Again, it's not about getting rid of a lost civilization. I'm actually here to show that there's no agriculture at all in the Ice Age. Yes. It doesn't have to do with a lost civilization, but that's a key component of your civilization. So the second trait...
Well, there's no agriculture at all amongst the Inuit either, right?
No.
Right.
But
they survived.
But in his books and in his Netflix series, he describes this civilization as introducing agriculture. He talks about seed banks and things like that.
Do I?
In the Magicians of the Gods. I have a quote in here.
Show me.
Okay, you want me to?
Yeah. Let's see it. I want to see it.
Give me a second. It seems fanciful to you want to use it? I can't do your accent.
You want to read it?
It seems fanciful to imagine that we might, in an almost high-tech sense, be looking at the specifications of a seed bank here. Oh, this is from Fingerprints of the Gods.
No, it's from Magicians of the Gods.
Oh, maybe I repeated it in Magicians.
Flint knowing Graham's own material better than he does while simultaneously proving him wrong is pretty chef's kiss. Well done, Flint.
When we think about sort of this change over time with domestication, we also see a change in time in the kind of stone tools that people are using. So it takes thousands of years before we start seeing these sickle-type blades associated with harvesting these crops, right? And then the next step we can take is this introduction, this sort of transfer of technology that agriculturalists do. And so when we go back to this sort of end of the Stone Age type period, where we're maybe looking for something like a seed bank or a shelter that's keeping these Noah's Ark or something like that, what we can also look at is it doesn't look like anything's introduced. These plants and animals get domesticated in the natural regions where their wild progenitors were growing. and living. We can track, for example, the rise of different agricultural societies from pollen that floats through the air. We can track, for example, tree crops when they start getting introduced and when they become common. We can track grains and when they come in and become very common in these different regions. And the key thing I want to draw your attention to is a lot of these proxies, these cores, are taken from coastal areas. And some are even taken from underwater. So we have underwater cores from the seabed, and we can reconstruct these sunken landscapes and the sort of ecosystem that was there. And nowhere do we see an ecosystem of agriculture, arboriculture, or anything like that. Instead, we see very natural landscapes, the type of landscapes that hunter-gatherers would live in. And so this, I think, is really important because there really is, it's not just that there's no evidence for agriculture that early, we have evidence against it.
I know I'm jumping around a bit here, but I'm just giving you a general sense of a very long section where Flint very clearly lays out the case for agriculture not existing during the Ice Age. Not just a lack of evidence for agriculture, but multiple lines of evidence that it cannot have been happening. This is devastating for Graham. To credulous laypeople, but what if we haven't found it yet, sounds pretty reasonable. But when you stack up the real science, it just isn't there. Again, to be as clear as humanly possible, not only is there zero evidence for Graham's magic civilization, but all of the evidence available specifically suggests that it can't have existed. Nowhere does Flint say it's impossible, and in fact science doesn't operate that way, but when all of the actual physical empirical evidence demonstrates that there was no agriculture anywhere in the world during the Ice Age, and you have Graham flat out admitting that he doesn't have a single scrap of evidence for the stories he tells, do you really need to hear any more? Can't any rational person conclude that it's just a grift?
Now, I'm not saying, and I've never said, and you will not be able to find a quote where I've said that they introduced agriculture. They introduced the idea of agriculture. And we're talking about a very small number of people. The myths speak of 7 sages again and again in multiple locations around the world.
Fucking hell, this is the most intense backpedaling I've ever seen. Graham is now saying that he never suggested that this magical civilization introduced agriculture, but just the idea of agriculture? So this super advanced civilization with 19th century level technology was so incredible that it thought of the idea of agriculture in a daydream and passed it along like a game of telephone until someone else got their act together and made it happen? This is just pathetic. Graham should be a politician.
Is this sudden surge towards domestication, which you rightly say is a long, slow process. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time, but we see those first steps being taken after, not before the Younger Dryas.
And that's not so sudden. We're talking about thousands of years when agriculture starts in different places. So, it's very early in Southwest Asia, but it's a 1,000 or plus year lag in East Asia or Mesoamerica.
Unreal. This is like a combination of creationists whining about the suddenness of the Cambrian explosion, which actually took tens of millions of years, and Thunderbolt's project douchebags pretending that some paintings in caves justify their claim that space lightning carved geological features on other planets. The guy is just all over the place. I really don't think we need to go through any more of this. To give Joe some credit here, he was genuinely neutral throughout this exchange. He was engaged. He asked thoughtful questions. He seemed interested in what Flint had to say, and there were even moments where he defended critical thinking and pushed back on things that Graham said. To anyone educated and science-minded, this was a huge win for Flint. That goes without saying. But there is plenty of evidence that it even swayed a significant proportion of Joe and Graham's fans, given how many times Flint clearly shut Graham down. But let's get to the aftermath. As you can see, Graham announced the episode as having posted, but then went radio silent. He was fully aware of how thoroughly he had been humiliated, an acknowledgement which was echoing throughout the internet. But with Graham softly crying himself to sleep, this left the field wide open for other grifters to step up and take the reins. Enter Dan Richards. As you'll recall, Dan is a pointless, incompetent toolbox with all of the devotion to falsehood that Graham has, but none of the charisma or grifting ability. Dan began mouthing off all over the internet about how Flint was a liar and that his debate performance was full of lies, a narrative which was boosted by Graham himself to give the illusion of having been vindicated, which only emboldened Dan further. This was swiftly addressed by Flint in a YouTube video and blog post.
He calls scholars, archaeologists, students, and really anyone who disagrees with him a liar, or a worm, or twisty, or some other similar slander.
It becomes very obvious that there's some archaeologists out there that are just completely untrustworthy.
And he really hates archaeologists as a group of people.
Most alternate historians have some sort of an issue with archaeologists.
Nasty hatred towards people whose sole crime is to have an underpaid job that researches the material remains from human history and prehistory. Why? Because we tell the truth about Atlantis, that it never existed, and that believing in it is like believing in flat Earth. He made a post on Twitter falsely suggesting that I taught with the ancestral remains of indigenous people at Dartmouth College. Over the next couple of days, he had conversations with several people, both YouTubers and my colleagues, who calmly explained that I study and teach about archaeological animal remains, not human remains.
I showed you very little of this because it only takes about 10 seconds to see that Dan is just a shithead con man and internet troll. But all of this harassment towards Flint was getting Dan the attention he so desperately craved, so he just went even harder with it. Graham began to do this too, since he was gearing up to promote Ancient Apocalypse Season 2, and decided that smearing Flint on every podcast he could gain access to was the only way to reclaim any shred of perceived credibility, since it was common knowledge that he had been thoroughly eviscerated. But the most disappointing outcome of this was that Joe, who seemed to be receptive to the facts Flint was providing during the debate, then completely greenlit the ridiculous trolling. Graham went back on Joe's show by himself, and together they repeatedly accused Flint of having lied during the debate, completely without basis.
I appreciate that he came on, and I thought it was going to be an interesting discussion, but it turned out he played fast and loose with the truth, and distorted quite a bit of information that were some key points that you had discussed, one of them being the amount of shipwrecks.
This is all centered around one figure about a number of shipwrecks that Flint got slightly wrong. It was an enormous number rather than an even more enormous number. That's it. Over 4.5 hours of discussion, citing countless studies, Flint got one fact a little bit wrong. Then comes more victim complex bullshit from Graham.
It actually makes the point that we have a very arrogant, very controlling discipline in archaeology, which has established a narrative about the past and which will fight tooth and nail to maintain that narrative, including using dirty tricks. And I think instead of smearing people who talk about the possibility of a lost civilization, or people who even talk about aliens, I think instead of smearing them, archaeology should understand why people are asking those questions. And people are asking those questions because they're not satisfied with what archaeology is offering.
They're not dissatisfied with what archaeology is offering. They don't know the first fucking thing about archaeology. They'd rather hear campfire stories about aliens than put in an ounce of effort to actually learn something. You give them those stories for money, and you're the one fighting tooth and nail right now to maintain that bullshit narrative, dirty tricks and all, even after getting taken to the cleaners by Flint for 4.5 hours, and all the evidence he provided that agriculture did not exist during the Ice Age. Let's be perfectly clear, this is immeasurably cowardly behavior from Graham and amounts to nothing but blatant damage control, but Joe fell for it hook, line, and sinker, let Graham crawl out from under Flint's shadow, and even began platforming these other grifters who were doing literally nothing but attacking Flint and amplifying Graham's lies. This began with Dan, who had grown increasingly hostile and childish, going so far as to publicly state that it's up to students to take matters into their own hands, citing how in the Maoist revolution, students tortured and killed their professors.
Students would put their teachers on mock trials and thump on their heads and even unalive some of them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that that's what I want to see happen. I'm saying that it's a time-honored tradition to bring students into your fights on things like this. With the students there, they should know that they have a liar for a teacher. They should know that they have a teacher who's being dishonest or something like that. If you're wanting to take this into meat space, let me be very clear. This is not a call to action. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. But I do know that a lot of you out there will do it.
How he didn't get his account suspended for this is totally mystifying, but it's just the kind of behavior that gets you booked on Rogan. So let's pivot now to the episode featuring Dan Richards and Jimmy Corsetti from the end of last year. If you were annoyed by Graham's behavior on Joe's show, get ready to be thoroughly disgusted, as this is 3 hours of totally substanceless, inflammatory banter. Let's take a look at some highlights.
Debunking of the debunking by Flint Dibble. And you really nailed him on so many of those things that he was dishonest about. And it just, I wish we knew in real time But unfortunately, it takes a lot of research to be able to figure out what he was telling the truth about and what he wasn't. And,
Great way to start, praising a liar for lying and teeing up Shit on Flint Dibble Fest 2024. Strap in, it's not getting any better.
The moment that I knew that he was lying about the science was when you asked him about the fertilization of plants. That's where they roll back into being no longer domesticated. And he was like, it'll just take thousands of years. It's like, no, I've researched this and I know better. And he was just knee-jerking, straight answer, just thousands of years. And when you pressed him, he's like, well, I don't know for sure.
Well, that's a bummer because that's his field of study.
Yeah, Dan has never studied that or anything else a day in his life. He has no idea what he's talking about. More importantly, Flint never claimed that this was his area of expertise. In fact, he explicitly stated that he wasn't positive about any precise time frame and that he would have to look it up. And he referenced the researcher who had published on this phenomenon of domesticated crops going feral.
How long would it take for them to revert back to their original
thousands
state?
of years again.
Thousands of years again.
Thousands of years.
How many thousands of years, you think?
Well, I don't know because I'd have to look that up because I know that we've observed this kind of stuff, feral, domesticates going feral, but I don't have that off.
And you said how many years from the original till the whole crop?
Something like 3,000 years.
3,000
Dorian
years.
Fuller's actually published a lot on estimating the time ranges of this.
Dan is just an unqualified buffoon who can't read primary literature. He read genetic studies about wild, domestic, weedy, and feral rice, none of which estimated a time frame for how long it would take for rice to go feral. He also ignored the fact that the genetic bottleneck of a domestication event would show up in subsequent feral strains, so we'd be able to observe an earlier domestication event from a lost civilization, even if feralization later took place. Here's a short excerpt from a video where an expert in the field responds to Dan's ridiculous claims, which I will also link below if you want to hear more detail.
Dan, while reacting to an archaeological conversation, however, skips physical archaeological evidence and instead lies to his audience using non-relevant genetic rice studies. He claims to be a good researcher and he's got this down and he's the man that's going to always find people not telling the truth. Well, what the happens when you're the guy not telling the truth, Dan? You've got 100,000 people that listen to your BS because you were too lazy to do research, yet you jumped online to tell people how Flint was wrong, to the point where people are calling him at his job. You lied. He didn't. Joe's question was a good question, and he was given an appropriate answer. It's going to last for thousands of years. If you don't like it, call up Pan, call up other geneticists, ask them.
So Dan's premier example of Flint lying is him lying and also being wrong and dumb. Amazing.
Flint was treating it as a debate, whereas you and Graham were both trying to sift to the truth. And that's why he was not going to give Graham one little corner, one little shred of possibility of being right anywhere, when in reality, it's a lot of, it's just like everything else in life, it's a lot of gray.
Graham announced it as a debate many times on Twitter, both leading up to the episode and after, and it was described as a debate by Graham and Joe on multiple other episodes. It was objectively a debate, and in the definitely a debate, Flint was the one upholding the truth and exposing a con man. This is a classic tactic for any fraud and their sycophants. If the person challenging them is soft, they just steamroll right over them. If they're tough and rake them through the coals, they just whine about how mean they are. Ridiculous.
But Baalbek, if there was one example, one ancient site on Earth that is evidence of a lost, ancient, advanced civilization, and by advanced, I'm not talking about space lasers here. I'm talking about more sophisticated than what we were taught in school for the known capabilities. And Baalbek has the largest stones that were ever quarried in human history, the largest stones that were lifted, stacked, and transported in human history, and the largest stone columns in all of classical history. And we're talking, so the trilithon stones, 3 stones, 900 tons apiece, or 800 metric tons.
There's something about copycat grifters that just make me sick to my stomach. I mean, Graham is bad enough. He's a lying fraud who sells fantasies for cash. But to give the guy credit, he works hard at his grift. He writes books. He practiced his sales pitch for decades. He figured out a way to sound convincing even to moderately intelligent people. Assholes like Jimmy are just utterly transparent scoundrels who realized that if they memorized the names of a few locations in in a couple of numbers and speak confidently on a huge podcast, they'll trick some idiots and carve out a little bit of the grift cash for themselves. Dan and Jimmy are barnacles who saw a ship full of money and heaved themselves onto its hull. It's revolting. Anyway, here Jimmy is queuing up a super long rant about huge rocks and people can't move such big rocks, therefore ancient super advanced civilization, despite no evidence whatsoever except how come these big rocks. This has been debunked so many times by so many people that it's barely even worth talking about. I'll just link to a few things in the description. This post from Andy White, a video from David Miano, and a Twitter thread from Hugh Thomas. It's not a mystery. We see indigenous peoples doing this even today. Sleds getting huge stones up steep hills, 300-ton blocks pulled by oxen, all using nothing but locally sourced wood and vines. Here's a guy moving 8-ton stones by himself. Now imagine 100,000 laborers working for decades. What do you suppose they could do? Everyone please stop with this complete and utter crap about having no idea how ancient people moved big stones. It's not a mystery. Frauds like Jimmy baselessly assert it, show none of the answers we definitely do have, and people just buy it because they like the story. Knock it off.
This exceeds the known capabilities of what the Romans had, and it's worth mentioning that this site is some 2,400 miles from Rome, the capital. And if they're going to say that this was created by the Romans, one, people need to understand that the Romans were renowned for documenting everything, yet this site is not credited to anybody. They don't know exactly who did it or when, but the academics conclude that it had to have been the Romans or the Phoenicians because, of course, there was no one before them.
The Baalbek site he never shuts up about is definitively Roman. Bringing up how far away it is from Rome is totally idiotic. It was a fucking empire, and these stones are placed in the terrace of a platform of a Roman temple. Excavators found material Roman culture under them, so they were placed by the Romans, not an earlier civilization. You can't have an older civilization on top of a newer one. It's called the law of superposition. Anyone who knows the first thing about archaeology knows this, which excludes Jimmy.
Would you agree that what we were taught in school, that the ancients were more sophisticated than the described narrative?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
See, then there you go. So we're on the same page because it's like, what's technology? Like, do they have space lasers and hydraulics? I'm not suggesting that.
Bow and arrow is technology.
Right, a horse saddle technology,
technology.
Right? So they had something else.
This is what I'm talking about. Graham is a fraud, but he is quite good at sounding like a scholar. These dumb fucks sound like 16-year-olds getting stoned for the first time. You guys, what we learn in school is lies. Ancient people had awesome technology because duh, they just did. No need to specify what technology we're even talking about. No need to substantiate this wild speculation with any evidence whatsoever. Just pat ourselves on the back for not buying the Rockefeller narrative. Moving on.
You know what's interesting about Baalbek as well is that it's in the Bible. The Lebanon Mountains are mentioned 103 times in the Bible. I am not a Bible thumper. I am a believer in a divine creation. I'm proud to say it because I've seen the proof in my own life. However, what's interesting is about Baalbek is that they said that it was created by Baal, which is like this demon entity in the Bible, and they declare it as the world's first civilization after the flood. And it was created by giants as punishment for what their iniquities of the flood.
Oh, wow.
And I have an article about it, Jamie. If you scroll through, you'll find it.
Now we're into Anunnaki territory.
There you go, right.
Exactly right.
Finally.
Yes, this is indeed slipping into total horseshit Anunnaki territory, as well as biblical literalism. Joe sounds a little bit sarcastic when he points it out, but it could be enthusiasm, given that he appeared to fall for everything Billy Carson spews. Who knows?
We mentioned Flint at the beginning. We have a problem, in my opinion, that most people that see things kind of like I do, as opposed to like Jimmy or yourself does, where they're looking, I kind of need to take my steps to get to that ancient high technology.
Right.
They end up going that just straight debunker route, and then they get skeptical. They get cynical. They turn into assholes. They're looking for ways
appeal to authority.
Shoot this down. I just fuck your idea, right? Just your idea is wrong. So I know what the implications are. Instead of saying, well, maybe there's other implications. Let's have a discussion about it. They just go straight to, no, this is impossible, this is stupid, make fun of the person, compare it to flat eartherism, compare it to aliens.
Yeah, educated people debunk the objectively wrong and dumb things you say. It sounds like you want to cry about it.
Well,
Nazism.
Flint's case, even worse. Yeah, in Flint's case, he's even worse. He somehow or another connects it to white supremacy.
It's not just Flint. It's that fucking John Hoops, man.
It is specifically directly linked to white supremacy. supremacy. Flint explained in pristine detail how the sources Graham cites are unequivocally linked to white supremacy, and how the logic behind these narratives is inherently racist. Pretending that indigenous people couldn't have generated their own culture, but it was instead handed to them by white people or aliens, is racist. And there are white supremacists who specifically reference Graham in order to convince people that white civilizations were responsible for indigenous monuments.
I like Hancock. It's kind of like listening to like some Third Reich archaeology, but without any of the baggage, so that I can watch it with somebody else. It's actually a good way of kind of introducing somebody to white superiority. Is you'll be like, hey, what do you think of this book? And then you give them a copy of that. And if they agree with it, then that means maybe they're open up to reading maybe something like March of the Titans or what have you later on. But it's a nice little intro to racialism.
Instead of acknowledging this, Graham just whined about how Flint specifically called him a white supremacist, which he didn't. The gaslighting here is off the charts.
By the way, John Hoops studied at Harvard and Yale. He got his undergrad, I believe, from Harvard and his PhD from Yale, or vice versa. This is significant because he's controlling the information.
What the fuck does that mean? He's somehow controlling information, and it's because he went to Harvard and Yale? Let me guess, those are Jesuit, Rockefeller, Illuminati, lizard person schools? I miss Graham.
It throws these facts, the physical facts about the size and the location they were brought from, that fly in the face of logic and credibility and our understanding of what's possible, not just then, but today. So for anybody to say, oh, we've figured this out, hey man, fuck you. You definitely haven't, and the problem is that you have these fucking names attached to you, Harvard and Yale, and you've decided because there's a group of people that have been studying this stuff and they fucking wrote some shit down and you studied what they wrote down and you did your own studying, you got a degree, you're the guy. You're the only one. And it's these same fucking weirdo weasels that put their pronouns in their Twitter bio, and they're just crackpots. They're crackpots masquerading as intellectuals.
This is the most immaculate soundbite for representing the entire problem with Joe Rogan's show. You get a bunch of midwits together who don't know the first fucking thing about the topic they're discussing. They whine about ivory tower intellectuals who actually know what they're talking about and therefore reject the baseless crap they spew, throw in a little transphobia, and then flawlessly project their own identities, crackpots masquerading as intellectuals, onto actual intellectuals. The ego, the delusion, the insecurity, the fragility, the anger. The best mixologist in the world couldn't put together a cocktail this potent. This is why this program is social poison. Want some more?
Yes.
Because the things that they're saying are completely bizarre. They're all, 100% of them are captured by this woke ideology.
They're
100% of them. They're weird people, man, because they exist in this structure that's been completely compromised. And that's our education. Our higher education systems have been completely compromised. And this is not to say that they don't teach you amazing stuff about medicine and science. Of course they do. But they are also in a cult.
It is a total cult behavior, and honestly, it's their religion. That when you ask like the motive
they're
behind,
mostly atheists. Yes,
they are. Let me just share this. So, with the biggest critics and the naysayers of alternative theories, there's a common denominator. Like when you mentioned the pronouns in their profile, almost all of them have it, and they're not trans. And if you look at their political ideologies, it is extremely left. And these people are visceral, they're toxic.
These people are toxic, says the toxic internet troll. It's just beyond pathetic. Educated people tend to be less religious because religious fundamentalism is wrong and dumb. And they also lean left because once you're educated, you immediately see through conservative class warfare propaganda, especially this woke ideology bullshit that all of you morons whine about nonstop. There is no such thing as woke ideology. Atheism is not a religion. Plenty of educated people are religious, just not biblical literalists. Getting triggered by pronouns makes you pansy-ass snowflakes, and you can all fuck yourselves.
So this is something that I got tremendous heat for. Whereas that when I went to Baalbek, I noticed that there were swastikas all over the place. And I'm like, well, that's interesting.
That's an ancient symbol, though.
What a lot of people are not aware of is that the swastika is prehistoric. It's found on 5 continents around the world and dates back approximately 10,000 years. It is found in Europe, Africa, Asia, North and South America, all before transoceanic sea travel was thought to be possible. If you scroll through the images, Jamie, you'll kind of give the audience an understanding. Now, let me preface this whole conversation with this. Fuck Hitler. He right? Like,
right, of course. Fuck Nazis.
God,
fuck all that.
Right? He stole the symbol, which was a symbol of peace, and he bastardized it. So this right here, I took this photo. You'd almost think it's photoshopped in. This is a photo. This is real. And I'm like, well, this is fascinating. I put this up on Twitter, and I said, did Hitler know something about ancient history that we don't?
Kiddo, everyone knows the swastika is an ancient symbol, and that's not a swastika. This is a meander pattern. These are all over Greco-Roman art and architecture. That it kind of, sort of, superficially resembles a swastika doesn't make it a swastika. This is why people make fun of you. Also because you do things like defend Musk's Nazi salute, pretending it was a Roman salute, which there is no evidence for ever existing.
Let me defend him. I'm like, there's no way he was doing anything related to Nazis. It was a Roman salute, and, you know, he is passionate about the Roman Empire.
Yeah, he's passionate about Rome, as in Mussolini's March on Rome, the guy who joined forces with the Nazis. Then let's not forget all of your genuinely anti-Semitic and hateful tweets, and then also acknowledge that you do nothing to push back on full-blown Nazis who champion you. Stop acting shocked that people associate you with Nazism.
I have not found an answer on why he was looking for the Ark of the Covenant. He was looking for Thor's hammer and the Holy Grail. Yeah. And the thing is, to me, I'm like, what did I feel like there's something that they knew about ancient history.
If you have that, you're a monster. But if you had Genghis Khan's sword, you're fucking cool.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting, that's a good comparison.
I mean, he killed a lot more people. He killed 10% of the population of Earth.
But he did it long enough ago that you don't hear anybody talking about it anymore.
He raped so many people that his DNA is in a giant percentage of people today.
It's like 20%.
Yeah, it's something ridiculous number.
We've done it before. I forget what the numbers are, but they're really nutty. But the point is there's something particularly disgusting to us about that one genocide, and it's really interesting.
It's because it was in the 20th century, guys. Yes, Genghis Khan raped and murdered a bunch. That's unfortunately how the entire world worked for thousands of years. We're trying to change that, and we've been somewhat successful. So when people do genocide, we should be upset about it, whether it's Hitler 80 years ago or the one his victims are ironically perpetrating today. There's a lot of Nazi apologetics going on here for people trying to distance themselves from accusations of Nazism.
If I'm going to ask questions about the swastika and you're going to say I'm spreading dangerous Nazism, some people will buy into it, but I've noticed that most people are like, no, he's asking a question.
Well, we have the internet now. We have shows like yours and mine where you can have conversations about things, and people get to see, oh, these people that are in control, they're all loons, and they're all telling us that you have to think this one way or you're the worst person on earth. And I don't buy it.
No.
It's a dumb way to look at the world.
It's un-American.
Jesus Christ. Again, everybody knows the swastika is an ancient symbol. This isn't why people call you a Nazi, Jimmy. That would be the Nazi rhetoric. Nobody in academia tells you what to think. They teach you how to think. And then Dan chimes in with America. Superb.
The government actually conspired to get these people removed from Twitter. And we know that because Elon, thank God, bought Twitter and changed discourse.
That's funny. I only got banned from Twitter after Elon bought it. Maybe he's not as into free speech as you think, Joe.
And this is one of their favorite tactics to do to Hancock. They will attack. This idea is racist. It's inherently bullshit. They don't have to mention Hancock's name. Now it's they just glue the two. They're so insidious this way.
Have you ever heard grown men whine so much? Graham is a lying fraud who has a huge TV show where he lies the whole time while actively disparaging real scientists and fueling science denial among the public. When those real scientists speak up about it, all you can do is play the victim card by proxy. It's pathetic.
You have these people that live in this incredibly resource-rich place, and they were able to spend thousands of years there. And I think in those thousands of years, they devised methods that we still haven't even considered because we went in a different path. And we can't consider any other paths. We consider our path, and we say, well, we're the furthest. We live today. Okay, so those fuckers in the past, they were basically cave people. right? That's how we look at it.
They look at them like dumb people playing with stones. They were silly. Yeah, they used stones because they weren't smart enough to use metal. It's like when you look at the details of stone, it's like, you could say it's more impressive.
It's just astounding that these guys think they're saying literally anything. Joe was talking about how Egypt used to not be a desert thousands of years ago, so people had lots of food and were super safe from war, because he says so, which allowed them to create super awesome technology, though he has absolutely no idea what that would be, and that allowed them to create the pyramids once Egypt was a desert, which again are just stacks of rocks that are undoubtedly impressive, but do not exhibit any of this otherworldly ultra precision they imagine out of thin air. And that's somehow way cooler than modern technology, like enormous skyscrapers that are 5 times taller than the Great Pyramid and rockets that take people to the moon. Awesome.
Well, we wanted to talk about Göbekli Tepe. And Göbekli Tepe is not just fascinating in its construction, but also in the timeline, because the timeline fucked everything up. I remember when Graham Hancock and Zawi Hawass were having that big debate with that other guy who's an archaeologist. The American guy's very smug. But he's like, what evidence do you have of a civilization that lived 10,000 years ago? Well, you have one now.
Yeah.
So you have to shut the fuck up because you were wrong.
Ah yes, Göbekli Tepe, every Rogan bro's favorite pseudo-intellectual flex. Joe is pretending that Graham was part of some kind of debate over this site when it was discovered in 1963 and began serious excavation in the 1990s. For those of you who aren't aware, it's a very interesting site that shows larger scale settlements prior to agriculture, which caused us to revise our thinking about agriculture being a necessary condition for larger settlements to form. Of course, any slight revision of archaeological knowledge to these dingbats equals C. The establishment is wrong and dumb and closed-minded and conspiracy, and we idiots are more better than the smart people. It's so pathetic. They talk about this for a long time, pretending the site is comparable to Babylon, which housed hundreds of thousands of people, complaining about how little of it is excavated, as though that's some huge conspiracy rather than following good archaeological practice of not damaging important sites. The whole 9 yards. Flint has talked about this extensively. There were Greek ruins that were unearthed by shovel, which destroyed a huge amount of data and artifacts that could have been preserved with modern techniques. These morons have no idea how archaeology is done, and thus have no business telling archaeologists how they should or should not be excavating.
They're going to defer a full-scale excavation for, quote, future generations with a 150-year estimated time frame for a full excavation of Göbekli Tepe. And I'm like, wait a second. Are you serious? Like, this makes no sense. We're talking about arguably not just the world's oldest ancient site, but arguably the most mysterious, because it's like you were just saying, it's not supposed to exist. Based on everything we were taught in school, it's supposed to be the Sumerians. And then you have the site of Göbekli Tepe, made up of sophisticated pillars and concentric circles.
At least 5,000 years older.
Yeah, that older than almost 7,000 years older than Stonehenge, and Stonehenge is a mystery of itself.
Right.
So I start Googling and looking into the details. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. How could they defer excavations for future generations when this may be the most important ancient site on Earth?
Yeah, that's the fucking point, asshole. It's really cool. So let's not destroy it by letting morons like you do some Googling and then go hog wild on it with a pickaxe. In the meanwhile, excavation is indeed constantly occurring. You can see the publications for yourself, but that would involve actually reading something. And the way he whines about learning about Sumer in school, yeah, that's the earliest large-scale civilization that we have any evidence for. Göbekli Tepe does not match the scale of Sumer by at least an order of magnitude, but even if it did, you're whining about schools not teaching things that hadn't been discovered yet. How are you this stupid? Then begin the conspiracies. World Economic Forum, climate change denial, keeping it hidden because something money something. It's not even worth dissecting. Oh, except maybe this one.
When you look at the legend of Noah's flood and Noah's Ark and the flood. So I'm not suggesting that there was a flood that covered every mountain on Earth, and nor am I suggesting that there was a boat that housed every species of animal on Earth. However, if Noah's Ark existed, many believe that it was crashed onto Mount Ararat, which is also in Turkey. And something fascinating is that in the Bible, in Genesis 8:20, some of the first verses after Noah emerged from the flood, is that he was said to have constructed an altar to the Lord where he sacrificed some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird. Göbekli Tepe is in Turkey, and every single one of those pillars annotates animals. And some have suggested that it could be Noah's altar. Now, That could be one reason why they wouldn't want to excavate it, is because Turkey is an Islamic country, and if there was some Christian religious belief that was corroborated, they might not want that to happen.
Yeah, Göbekli Tepe proves Noah's Ark is real, and the dirty Muslims don't want the truth to get out. Jesus Christ.
There could be a possibility that they don't want the evidence of a prehistoric civilization that was more advanced than what we ever thought to believe, that might corroborate some Christian narratives. And if nothing else, they don't want it to be brought into the discussion of modern day climate change. Because notice on the topic of climate change, they never mention natural stuff. They don't discuss the Milankovitch cycles, which consists of 3 variables, one of which is the Earth's precession, the other is the Earth's tilt, and the other is the distance from the Earth from the sun.
My God, it's just the most high-octane stupid imaginable. Hey, dumbass, scientists know what Milankovitch cycles are. They take tens of thousands of years, and beyond the ridiculously long time frame, our current positions in those cycles do not correlate with warmer temperatures. So they absolutely do not in any way explain the hyper-rapid climate change we've seen since modern industrialization. I talk about this in my ecology series, so check out this tutorial if you want more details. But it's just a complete non-starter.
So when I was on your show last time and I was mentioning Elon Musk talking about ice ages being a deep, deep rabbit hole, do you remember that? He was talking about it? Well, I know what he's talking about. It's this. It means that we're already in the window where things could start cooling again. And when it does, we're in a lot of trouble. I think, and I can't speak on his behalf, I got to tell you, next time, could you just text him and ask him if he thinks it's related to pole shifts?
Yeah, Joe, can you text Elon Musk and ask him to explain environmental science to us? What the fuck is this reality?
Let me give a quick shout out to Ben Davidson of Suspicious Observers. I recommend maybe you link up with him. Nobody has researched the topic of pole shifts and sun cycles as much as him.
Of course this sociopathic piece of shit is a fan of another even more sociopathic, even bigger piece of shit. Let me take this opportunity to plug my evisceration of Ben Davidson in this debunk right here. His apocalypse camp appears to be up and running, so you may hear from me about this asshole again in the near future.
There's a space.com article titled that in 2025, some scientists are suggesting that the Earth's ocean currents may stop. Have you heard this?
No.
Okay. And nowhere in the articles do they mention anything about pole excursions. So people need to understand that we're already in the middle of a pole excursion, which is a partial pole flip, which means that things are shifting inside the Earth. It's also known that that can cause changes in ocean current. Now, most mainstream articles, let me just be fair and tell you what they'll say. They'll say that, oh, no, it's related to man-made climate change. We're changing the currents of the ocean. I don't believe that.
Well, you should, because it's true. Ocean currents are like air currents. It's about regions of hot and cold water rising and falling due to density. And since the polar ice caps are melting at an alarming rate, a bunch of fresh water is being dumped into the ocean, which disrupts this density-driven circulation mechanism. The currents are slowing down, and if they slow down all the way, that means no ocean currents, which would be catastrophic. Stop whining and open up a fucking book, Jimmy.
The problem is this whole narrative of climate science has been adopted by these same fucking people that want Twitter pronouns. It's the same people. It's the same sort of thing.
Joe, you are a mental midget. Climate scientists don't give a shit about your pronouns. They're busy trying to prevent the loss of dozens of coastal cities from sea level rise and other related disasters. Get a clue.
When I did the debunking of Flit Dibble's debunking of Graham, the part about the metallurgy, I spoke with an ice core specialist. And now there ain't but a handful of these dudes on the planet. Literally just a handful of people.
That was a very important part of your debunking.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
You're the guy that blew the roof on that.
Yeah.
You're the guy that contacted firsthand.
Well, let's explain what you did.
Well, I spent an hour on a Zoom chat with the dude because what Flynn had said was that there was no proof of metallurgy in the Ice Age. And, well, of course, there's no proof of it, but he said that we can prove definitively there was no metallurgy. And that's where it's like, well, no, because they look for levels of lead, and levels of lead, that graph you just showed with the interglacial periods, lead follows that. Because when there's more dust on the ground, the reason they believe is there's more dust on the ground, more gets kicked up, more ends up in the glaciers. But that's the same dirt that would be kicked up if they were digging for iron, right? So either way, you're going to end up with more lead in the glaciers. So I talked to this ice core specialist for an hour on Zoom, and I'm like, man, so flesh this out for me. Explain to me. So he explains to me how they determine whether or not lead's from an anthropogenic origin or if it's natural, and that's based on if there's an archaeological site that they can match the other isotopes to. He went through all the troubles with it. He even lamented having, he's got other people in his field that are hardcore anti-pseudoscience because they're, climate change deniers are dealing with. And so he's like, some of these guys are just too zealous, overzealous with it. I get where you're coming from. But then I put the video out and Flint contacts the dude. And next thing you know, well, I didn't exactly say it. He doesn't change what he says. He just kind of implies that I wasn't quite being accurate. He doesn't give a full anything. It makes it vague all of a sudden, and it's quite clear. He was pressured from a fucking archaeologist. He's a climate scientist. Why do you care? Because they're all part of the same little.
More dishonesty. A baseless claim that scientists don't do isotope analysis on lead in the Pleistocene when they absolutely do. Flint goes into great detail about this in another podcast appearance, which I'll link below, and Dan is objectively misrepresenting the ice core scientist. No cabal of elites pressured him into recanting. Dan misrepresented the scientist. Here he is in this tweet explicitly stating that Flint did not lie and that there is no evidence for an early advanced civilization in the ice core record, which in fact acts as evidence against such a civilization existing. Here are several articles which also describe how they do test ice cores in this manner. Listen to multiple experts who specifically work in this area for a living, or blindly believe some random jerk with a hobo beard. Take your pick.
There's so many parts of the leftist platform that they need to have these narratives, and one of them is climate change, and that Donald Trump is a climate change denier. The right-wing people are climate change deniers.
Ergo science deniers, ergo racists.
It's very, 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 very stupid.
Trump is a climate change denier. You guys are climate change deniers. You're whining about Milankovitch cycles and pole shifts as though you have any fucking clue what you're talking about, while denying the entire field of climate science and just shouting George Soros as though that's worth anything. You accuse academics of being political when you are either knowingly or unknowingly acting as empty vessels for a conservative anti-science agenda servicing fossil fuel conglomerates.
That's what's crazy about this, is that data has become politicized. Science and data and knowledge has become politicized.
Yeah, so stop aligning with the side that's doing that, genius.
It's just human ego and control. Humans always want to be the experts, and they always want to be the one in control of the information. If the information that's new that's coming out counters their control and their expertise, they reject it. And it's just ego.
No, ego is a bunch of clueless podcasters thinking they know more than people who study something for their entire lives.
The best dating is that the Great Pyramid is somewhere around 4,500 years ago. That was from organic material taken between casing stones. You could argue that the casing stones were restored because even the Romans restored parts of the Sphinx.
It's not from the casing stones. Those were robbed from the site a long time ago. The dating comes from a variety of contexts around the pyramid. But tell me again how it's Flint who plays fast and loose with the facts.
Yeah, this is what they always show. They always show these naked dudes. Look at them, bare ass.
Heave ho.
So just to be clear, naked? I know, because they want to show them that they're dumb and primitive, and that playing with
the dude with the whip, he's got some clothes on. Look at that.
Right.
That guy's got clothes on.
What the shit are you talking about, dumb and primitive? They're pulling stones. This is how they did it. You're saying absolutely nothing. They had thousands of laborers working over decades using this sort of technology. Ropes, ramps, sleds. That's it. That's how the pyramids were built. Get over it.
Because I love those stories. I love Sitchin stuff. It's just because it's the funnest possibility is that human beings were genetically engineered by a superior race that came here to mine gold.
Yeah, we know you love it, Joe. You love insane fabricated bullshit. That's kind of the problem with your show. When a real scientist is present, you manage to seem open to what they have to say. And to be honest, I believe that you genuinely are in that moment. But as soon as they leave, asshole frauds jump in to seduce you with stories you enjoy, and in return, you platform them over and over again without ever bringing in someone knowledgeable to challenge their bullshit, because you don't actually care about what's true. Anyway, there's not much else to dig into here. They ramble about the pyramids being mystical energy sources, conspiracy theories about being banned from Turkey, more dick-riding Elon Musk, whining about the media being a leftist echo chamber while praising Jeff Bezos for buying the Washington Post. They are so far gone it's bananas. People who are trying to save the world from a fascistic oligarchy are desperately being painted as woke ideologues by that same oligarchy, while Joe and others like him amplify this bullshit narrative until it gains critical mass and the public begins to coalesce with their own subjugation. It makes me want to cry. Both of these jerks have really been making the rounds as of late, and as they get more popular, their lies become bolder and more negligent of reality. Here they are on another podcast, spewing more bullshit about the pyramids.
You know what's far more out there is suggesting that it was a tomb for the pharaohs. Like, they've never
Flint Dibble.
Yeah, they have never found. Never mind, they never found a mummy in any Egyptian pyramid ever.
This is such an easily Googleable and objectively false statement that it's impossible to treat them as anything but piece of shit trolls. Sarcophagi, human remains, parts of mummies, funerary goods, and more. This is so extensively well documented, obviously in the primary literature, but even in museums that everyone has access to. Who the fuck is their audience here that they just eat up crap like this? The pyramids are tombs. Get over it. And for fuck's sake, stop whining about Flint.
And I had never done anything to them. Flint Dibble and John Hoops had preemptively blocked me before I had any type of correspondence with them at all. I had never spoken about them negatively, nothing. And I was blocked. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't understand it.
Hey, dipshit, you publicly claimed that Flint was faking his cancer, and you also encouraged your idiot fans to call his university to try and get him fired. You're human garbage. On that note, that's our introduction to Dan Richards and Jimmy Corsetti, the two most pointless trolls in the pseudoarchaeology space. Having had quite enough of his name being dragged through the mud simply for trying to set the archaeological record straight, Flint issued a public letter to Joe in which he points out the cowardice of letting all of these people disparage him on the show without being given the opportunity to defend himself. As of yet, no attempt has been made by Joe to bring Flint or any other reputable archaeologist onto the show to discuss these ludicrous claims, which is not at all surprising, since reality and integrity are not tremendous concerns of his. In the meantime, Dan becomes more depraved by the week, displaying behavior that is nothing more than a desperate attempt to cling to the mild relevance he experienced by going on Joe's show. He couldn't convert Joe's audience into his own, so absolutely nobody is watching his content, as there is nothing of substance to engage with. He built his entire persona on harassing Flint, so when Flint stopped engaging, Dan just moved on to other targets, such as Milo Rossi of the channel Mini Minuteman. Milo laced into him for a while, and once he was through with him, Dan found himself ignored yet again, prompting him to film a video of himself in his car, essentially just whining about how Milo unfollowed him on Instagram.
My boy Milo Rossi ain't my boy no more, and that does make me sad. I'll be straight up honest with you.
So between the two halves of this video, we now have a very clear picture of Graham Hancock, Dan Richards, and Jimmy Corsetti. Though there is a tremendous disparity in their abilities to peddle this grift, it is a singular grift they all cling to, one which has become far too pernicious and lucrative to ignore any longer. It is very likely that Dan and Jimmy will continue to fade into irrelevance, but Graham doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. He has a cult-like following of willfully ignorant drones who exemplify the anti-intellectual attitude I've been highlighting in virtually every debunk I've done for the last several years. These are the idiots who insist that anyone educated who works in a professional setting within a given field must be wrong, and any uneducated grifting asshole who spews baseless crap on the internet must be right, because establishment bad, rebel good. This is a toxic, childish attitude that has the potential to bring about the end of human civilization, but you don't need to hear me explain that for the 100th time. Most of you are probably aware of Milo's YouTube channel, Mini Minuteman, but if you aren't, definitely head over there and subscribe. We have similar debunking styles, and he has a lot of content shredding all of this pseudo-archaeology bullshit in far more detail than we've covered here. But now let's check in with Flint. Flint, thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to be talking with you here.
Yeah, it's really great to be here, Dave. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm really glad that you're doing this, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, first things first, I definitely just want to start off by thanking you for doing what you did. I'm always talking about how not enough scholars do that, so thank you from the bottom of my heart for standing up to this nonsense. Any general thoughts about the experience?
Well, it was a little surreal. I'm not going to lie about that. I think most of my thoughts are on this aftermath that you covered. I mean, so let's think about the experience itself. I have to say, I was surprised at how weak Graham came to the debate.
Yeah.
He had advertised this debate for a long time, and I'd done a lot of research on him. And, I had a grudging respect. I didn't agree with anything he said, but he clearly seemed to believe in the narrative that he writes about and talks about.
Passionate.
But yeah, very passionate. And he had the first opportunity to have an extended debate with an archaeologist. And we knew we were each going to prepare 3 segments. And none of his segments were there to defend any of the archaeological conclusions he'd made. And so that to me was really weak, and maybe even showed me that he feared talking to an archaeologist, because I would have ripped him apart on one of those sites.
Yeah,
for example.
You did 20 minutes of science, and then he opened with archaeologists are mean. It's like just really just such weak sauce stuff. So I mean, my impression was this. So I had heard before I did this piece, I was aware of the debate, but I didn't watch it. I wasn't even aware of like Dan or Jimmy or any of these other people. So digging into this has been very fascinating. And I actually watched the debate and was like, wow, like not only did you come to the table with so much evidence, but Joe seemed really receptive and was like learning and engaging in I thought a pretty good faith manner. And so that's why the aftermath was absolutely insane to me. It seems very obvious that Graham was discouraged by the result and was kind of hiding a little bit, and then probably not through his action. I think just genuinely these other guys like Dan just saw an opportunity to kind of, get a little bit of spotlight, and then Graham fueled them. And then all of a sudden it turned into this, well, Flint needs to have been a liar because that's how I can come back out of the shadows. So that's the narrative, and whatever we got to say to push that. So how was that like just first becoming aware of like, wait, what is everybody saying? What's happening now?
Yeah, that was the real surreal. I mean, the whole thing was surreal, but that was very surreal as well, because it was just kind of like, I mean, I obviously didn't lie. I cited everything. It was up on screen, and it was just kind of like, how is anybody believing this narrative when you could just go check the video and see what's there. Yeah. And it's all right there. And so it really, I had an email exchange with you where you mentioned it exemplifies this kind of post-truth environment where they kind of just keep pushing this narrative over and over again until people believe it. And that's how it seems to have been. I mean, I've even seen people online say, other scholars think I lied. And it's just like, are you fucking kidding me? I mean,
names, please.
Oh no, I just saw it on Reddit or
no. I mean, we want to ask them who are these scholars that are calling Flint out? Like, what are you talking about?
Lied? Like, and to prep, I talked with something like 12 to 15 different scholars to make sure I would make the right points about things like the domestication of plants and animals, about Ice Age sites, about sites that Graham talks about, which we didn't even cover. Half the scholars I didn't even have to talk to. But I mean, I did to make sure I did that kind of homework so that I'd be ready to represent the field. Yeah. And I did represent the field, but it's tough to convince the public when Joe Rogan has such a platform,
Has such a platform, and that's the disappointing part, is I applaud him for putting on the debate and being neutral during the debate, but then he clearly got, seduced by this narrative because it feeds his, like, pro-conspiracy, anti-establishment bias, and then to ice you out and to ice the legitimate archaeological community out of further discussion. Like, if he wants to have Dan Richards and Jimmy Corsetti on, fine. Have on an archaeologist too, right? Like have on either you or one of your colleagues or something to push this back. Instead, no, you came on once and then it's Graham 3 more times and Dan 3 times, Jimmy all these times. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? Like you clearly have no interest in actual dialogue. You have no interest in learning anything about archaeology. It's just really depressing.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key. A lot of these kind of podcasters in that kind of sphere, they talk about how they're interested in genuine dialogue. It's about long-form podcasting. You know that Lex invited me on his podcast in the aftermath, and then like immediate aftermath. And I said, look, I have excavations and stuff I'm going to and research. Let's push it back to the fall. And then boom, we set it up. He was going to come to London. We were going to do it there. And then as soon as some of this backlash came about, he completely ghosted me. and instead had Graham on to trash me in that
Wow.
podcast. And he's like, I'm for open conversation and open dialogue. No, you're not, man. You just want to listen to the side that your fans are going to like because this is what your fans like.
Yeah,
And
it's
so, it's just hypocrisy.
they're
And,
servicing an audience. Yeah,
yeah.
people like Joe and these other podcasters. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. I really hope that this piece makes an impact. I feel like more so than bringing any really new information to the table, it's just sort of a standalone piece for anybody who is curious about what these arguments are regarding pseudoarchaeology. Here it is, just laid out, everything that happened. Just you can really dig into this and really see who these people are. I hope that it brings a little bit more popularity to you and Milo and other people in archaeology and encourages other scholars. Like when I go and give talks at universities and I try to encourage not just students to enter science communication, but failing that, to just work with science communicators, right? To either engage in SciComm on your own or just as you're doing in this piece, right? You're lending your credibility and your expertise to this piece since I'm not an archaeologist, as I want others to do in biochemistry and medicine and geology and physics and all the rest. We really need to fight this because the post-truth nonsense, the complete war against science, the war against reality, it's going to take us down if we don't take a stand right now. And we need everybody on this. So.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with those thoughts, Dave. I mean, I think that as an expert with 25 years of field and lab experience, like I think we need to speak up, the experts. I think science communicators like you and Milo and others, you all need to speak up too, and we need to be working together. But I think there's a role that actual experts have in speaking up, and I think that we have the training and the experience to do so from the teaching that we do. What I do when I give talks at universities is I try to convince my colleagues to participate and to do more public engagement and not to share their research, because your research is sort of in this discourse with the field and stuff like that. It's tough to provide a context that the public can actually understand when you're so close to that high level stuff.
Yeah.
But to instead take one of your best introductory lectures, adapt that, put it on YouTube. It's already designed and pitched towards that level of audience. And so I wish that more experts would do this. I think we have to speak up. We have funding going away. We have aggressive attacks on us from the public and from politicians. And so the best way to justify what we do is to actually teach, and to teach how we do things and what we do and in an interesting way. I mean, like I have a video that's going to drop today on Pompeii and the thing that tourists always overlook, which is just these amorphous gray blobs. No tourist knows what they are, but they tell the fucking coolest story out there about Pompeii in my mind. They're my favorite thing. So, go check out my channel. And I think that it's the kind of thing that you need experts to actually also participate in so that we can have a more cohesive ecosystem between science communicators, scientists, and just, really raise our voices right now because we have to.
Yeah, I agree completely. More scientists doing SciComm, more scientists working with SciCommers and elevating the quality of our SciComm, just all across the board. So I think you've done a pretty heroic job here. I hope that your example will inspire others to do the same. And that's all I've got. I just want to thank you. Anything else on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just say don't be afraid of the harassment. It's all mostly online trolls. It sucks to read the stuff, but it's like, it's just a bunch of online trolls. These people, as you've covered with Jimmy and Dan, they're just losers.
Yeah.
They're just out there to troll. And it's like, you know what? Their word means nothing.
Right.
So, we got to move on and educate people is what we need to do.
And to share some perspective, I think once you and I are in the same boat in that we are now very used to people making long YouTube videos about what lying frauds we are with absolutely zero basis. I mean, this happens to me on a weekly basis. Once you get used to it, it's just nothing. You just get numb to it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter. Shouldn't dissuade you from doing the good work. Well, thanks again, and let's see if this piece can make a little bit of noise.
Thank you, Dave. I'm honored. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Flint. These guys, Milo and Flint, are doing some of the best work combating pseudoarchaeology that's out there today. My hope is that they continue to gain popularity, which may in turn encourage other archaeologists and related scholars to speak out against this disgusting wave of pseudoscience in their academic space, just as I hope more scientists in general begin to speak out against science denial in this current climate of anti-intellectualism. These are scary times we are living in, where factual information is regularly disregarded and drowned out by sensationalist lies. Never in human history have we been so thoroughly inundated with falsehood and deceit on a minute-to-minute basis, from popular media all the way to the White House. Should our darkest fears become realized, it will be because not enough of us did enough in these times to stop it. So let's stay vigilant and be loud as all hell, because our potential as a species is just too much to waste. So that's it for Graham Hancock, his loser sycophants, and the stories they peddle to the detriment of legitimate science. Will there be an Ancient Apocalypse Season 3, or can this clown be debunked into oblivion? I don't know, but let's give it the old college try. Until next time.